Hello there and welcome to this slightly different video. In the past on this channel I've been putting sort of tutorials out that seek to instruct and kind of showcase language features of the Scala programming language, but actually in this video we're going to be using Java. Now Scala is in many ways similar to Java. It's also very different to Java in a lot of ways, but it does borrow kind of the core feature set of Java because of course Scala runs on the JVM just like Java does. So there are going to be some sort of things that you can pick up from this tutorial, that I think will help you in your Scala programming, but a lot of it's going to be very different. Um, and the reason I'm doing this video today is actually I'm part of a pretty introductory Java course at the moment, and we've got a final project due. And for the final project, my group and I, we chose to do um, what will basically be a sort of it's a Sudoku-like game. It comes from um, a website. I'll put a link in the description, but it's a pretty simple game, so it shouldn't be too difficult to build the algorithm that we want to build, which is a solver for the game. So just like you've got a Sudoku solver where you're given an initial board configuration with some numbers, just a few numbers and then a lot of blank spaces, the solver can basically fill in all those blank spaces with a potential solution. And in some cases there are multiple solutions. Um, so that's what we're working on. But right now here, and what I wanted to showcase in this video was um, the JavaFX library. So this is a sort of very rudimentary model view control application, and it's basically going to be how we, control the actual solver. So we're going to be able to give it an initial board configuration. There are going to be some different board types we can choose from, different dimensions, and then we're going to be able to populate that board with, again, the initial configuration. So a few spots that are selected and then everything left blank, and then we'll be able to, let's say, hit a solve button, and it will fill in the rest of the board for us. So we won't actually have to solve the game, it'll solve it for us. So we're just busy with the UI right now, and I've actually never done a sort of a GUI application. Not really. I mean, I've done very, very basic stuff, but this is definitely the most complicated um, application, GUI-wise that I've ever tried to build. So I took the time to learn JavaFX, and I'm definitely still picking it up, but I think I've got a pretty good sense of some of the basic kind of functionality. And one of the really cool things about JavaFX is this what's called an fxml file. So it's a JavaFX XML file. Now this is not actually valid XML. This is just kind of a DSL in the style of XML. And basically what we're doing here is we're building our object hierarchy. So we're basically saying we want a pane, that's the root node, and then the pane is going to have some children. Specifically, it's going to have a choice box child, it's going to have a grid pane child. The grid pane is of course the board. The choice box has a number of board configurations we can choose from. So basically what we're doing here is we're actually kind of taking what would be a lot of boilerplate code, and we're just building it into this really extensible format, this really simple, clear format that again just looks like XML. I mean, it isn't, but it does look quite similar, right? You can see that these objects are kind of their own tags, So it's a really, really nice format actually, but actually quite powerful. You can see we can do things like this on value change. This is actually monitoring a property, and when the property changes, it calls this controller, this MVC controller right here. Let me just show you that. And it looks at, okay, the observable value, which we ignore, and then it actually shows the old value, so what the choice was, and then what the new choice is, and so we can actually compute then, you know, well, we can do different things based on what happened. So as it stands right now, the organization is a little bit all over the place. So what I want to do in this video is just kind of go through the code that I've already written and figure out how I want to organize it. Right now the layout is a little bit crazy. Let me show you actually just a demo of how it works. Um, and it's not really functional because all the layout is just kind of all over the place. So you can see here, it creates this tiny, tiny little window, just big enough to contain the elements at their default size. Basically, what it is it's this choice box here. So you can select here a number of board configurations, and then as soon as you choose a board configuration, for example, the 8x8, it will actually populate this window with an 8x8 set of buttons. So you can see each one of this is a button, and if I click any one of them, it'll actually not only put a little message here, but it'll message in the message. It'll contain the location of the button. So this is button 00, this is button 77, this is somewhere in the middle, yeah, 43. So you can see that it's actually, not only is there this, functionality of every time you hit a button it does something, there's also this power of kind of the buttons know where they are. And we're going to definitely extend that idea. Um, the way that that works actually is by creating this index button class, which extends button. And basically an index button is just a button that has a row and a column. Okay, you can see that the constructor here literally just initializes the button itself, and then it sets the row and it sets the column. It's as simple as that. So every time we redimension the board, it should actually clear the board and repopulate it with a new set of buttons. Now you can see that the buttons have actually replaced. I don't know if I can. Yeah, see, I can't get to the original selection box. It's just been covered by these buttons. Um, so that's not exactly what we were looking for. Um, so we're gonna have to work on the layout a little bit. But basically, the way that this should work is that we have this board configuration, right? We have this set of buttons, and each button is going to represent a tile. And a tile can be blank, like you just saw there. Those are all blank. It can be blue or it can be red, and it should rotate between those. And so, we're not gonna jump in and do a lot of nitty-gritty coding, but I just wanted to kind of get a sense of, okay, what have we built and how can we reorganize it? Because MVC is all about, you know, decoupling components, making things, that could get really complicated with a lot of kind of, mixing and what we call spaghetti code, right? Code that just is totally unorganized, and anytime you try and get at one piece, it pulls all the rest of it with it, right? So you kind of really think of spaghetti in that sense. Um, we want to really have these isolated components, these modular components that we can work on in isolation, and that really helps us actually write, dependable, extensible programs, right? So let's see, just based on what we've written, whether or not we feel like we're satisfying those criteria, right? Are we actually building a modular design here? And one of the things that concern me here is that there seems to be too much logic in the controller, right? The basic idea of model view controller is that you've got a model, and the model, there's nothing in there, and that's for good reason. The model is all about the computation side. So for example, the solver is going to be in the model, right? It's going to have all our data. It's going to have all this kind of information in it. So we're going to have data, for example, on the, and I was thinking, okay, so what kind of data do we want? Do we want data related to the visual components? It seems like that should be the case, right? Um, I guess there are a few different ways we could do it. We could have a view that is presenting and is changing on its own, and then we kind of take all that information and send it to the solver, which would be in the model. Or we can try and put more information in the model and try and feed, sort of pull information from the model to populate the view. So let's think about that a little bit, because like I said, one of the things we want to build is this functionality for the colors, right? The ability to hit a button, have it change first to red, and then hit it again, have it change to blue, hit it again, have it change to blank, right? So it should oscillate like that. And we're thinking, an enumerated type, some sort of rotation, that kind of thing, right? So that's the basic idea, but the important thing always is, again, to, before you just start writing code, figure out, okay, where should these pieces go? where should these pieces go? So right now we have that this UI interacts with the controller in a few different ways. The first way it interacts with the controller is that it calls this function when the value of the choice box changes. It calls this function changed board dimensions. So it's basically alerting the controller, hey, the dimensions, the selected dimensions have changed. And basically what's called here then is, well, this is just a little output. This is just to say, okay, there was no board configuration and now we've changed it 8 by 8, right? And if we were to, use this selection box again, if it weren't hidden by the buttons, we'd see, okay, if I were to change it to 12 by 12, then it would say, okay, we were at 8 by 8, now we're at 12 by 12. So this line is just a little bit of logging. The next line here actually takes the dimensions and just splits them on the X. So basically, 8 by 8, 12 by 12. We split on the X and we get 8 and 8, 12 and 12. And then basically what it does is it says, okay, well the first one is the rows and the second one is the columns, right? Which is that true actually? Hang on, let me think about that for a second. If I say that it's 3 by 2, do I mean that there are 3 rows, 2 columns? Yeah, that is what it should mean. So then what we do is we redimension the board with the rows and the columns. So this is the line that makes us a little bit, everything up until this point is just collecting data and then sending it out. But this is the question. So redimension board is actually in the controller. So does that make sense? Now the controller is supposed to be the kind of the gateway between the view and the model, right? So it's basically that in the view we have all this kind of logic surrounding the UI, right? The controller is what communicates between the view and the model. So basically, if the controller wanted to, it could update the view and the model at the same time. That might make sense for our application. Or it might, somehow transmit data from, the model could call the controller, and the controller would then call the view. Again, basically we're just trying to decouple these components. But the basic isolation we want is an isolation between the model and the view. That's as I understand it. And bear with me, I really have only kind of been looking at this for a day or so. So it's still fresh in my mind, and I'm still trying to figure out, not only kind of the general framework, but also how it fits into this particular domain. So I guess what I'm wondering, all that to say, is the redimension board, is that something that the controller itself should be doing? Well, let's see what redimension board does. It takes the board, it clears all the board children, and then it basically, okay, this is just declaring index button row column, which is going to be any number of things. So row starts at 0, goes all the way to rows, column starts at 0, goes all the way to columns. Index button becomes a new index button with the row and column for each row and column. And then what we do is we set handlers on the index button. And basically these handlers simply take the action, get the source of the action, which is whatever the object is that the actual event was set on, and it knows that object will be an index button, and so it gets that index button and it asks for the index button's row, its column, and then it prints those out. So does that make sense? Does that make sense? I guess, on the one hand we've got something that looks like handling logic here, right? But on the other hand we've got something that looks like view logic. right? We've got something that's actually creating, just like in the UI, we're populating choice box with value. Here we're actually populating the grid pane. So maybe redimension board should be in view. Let's see what that might even look like. So I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to paste it into view. And it's going to say, okay, do you want to import these values? And I'm going to say yes. Now, board, and this is the thing. Okay, this is what we completely missed, right? So basically, board is something that is only in this scope because we have a very special functionality in the FXML. So basically, if we declare an FX ID and we have a controller here using this FX controller attribute, then if we have an initialize function, okay, this is what's going to be started the first time that this gets started, so we could use this to further populate the UI. In this case, we just use it to kind of log hello world, whatever. But also, all of these public grid pane board, you'll notice that this name is the same name as this FX ID. So we're actually referencing a component in the UI itself. So this is functionality that the controller has to have. That it has to have. All right, what we're going to do here, redimension board. We're going to have a board, a grid pane board. That's going to be the board that we use. Okay. So basically, redimension board is going to be something that we call and this is a static method. So we can say then view dot redimension board. Is that not valid? Board. It's saying here redimension board has private access. Oh, of course. Okay. 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 So now we can go back here and we can think about this component. Alright. And this component is the kind of the tricky one, because this feels much more like controller logic, right? This feels less like something having to do with the view and something more that has to do with the controller, right? This is not logic we want in the view necessarily. This is something we want the controller to have, and the controller can choose then to tell the view about it. So I want to be able to somehow extract this and put it into the controller. So this is obviously not valid Java code, but imagine if we were to just kind of have a function. Okay. Maybe static, maybe void handle. And we wouldn't just say handle, we would say handle button. Maybe board cell, or trying to think of a name here. I want this to be descriptive. Let's remove this right here. So we'll keep it at handle board button. Okay. So could this be passed along like this? this is public. Handle board button. Saying cannot resolve symbol handle board button. I find that hard to believe. Oh, it's because it's looking for. Okay, so this is again, you know, too much stuck in that Scala mindset. We're trying to use functions as values here, and it does not like that. What it's actually looking for here is not a lambda per se. What it's actually looking for here is a handler so it's looking for an event handler of action event. Okay. And it should have a public void handle function which takes an action event. Call that an action. And we could then call the controller function from there. Of course, Alt-Enter to import the class. So this would work. It does feel like maybe we could get this. Let's see. Dick event handler action event. Board button handler. Okay. Right. And this creates new event handler of type action event. Okay. Oops, sorry. Yeah. Public handle void handle action event action. Okay. What is this issue here? Alright, so let's see. The view can now set on action the controller dot board button handler. Okay. I wonder if you need a new handler every time, or if we could have a static value which was this handler. It's probably more straightforward just to have this in there as well. It just clarifies things. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'll keep it like this for now. So this is, alright. And I apologize if this feels a little bit aimless. In some sense it is. This is just live coding, and I'm just sort of processing this, you know, in the moment. If I see something, then I try and address that problem, and sometimes I miss something, or just as you saw me there, I make some sort of assumption about where a component can be that doesn't actually make any sense. So I have to reevaluate. But I think that these kind of videos are actually helpful because if you're someone definitely who's used to the kind of the standard tutorial, I think it can be hard to realize, in much the same way that we're used to seeing these kind of almost alien visions of beauty, from fashion magazines. But there's still something in our brains that kind of can't let go of the idea that this might be a reality, right? And in the same sense, like, even though in the back of our minds we might know that, okay, a tutorial that's, in 5 minutes explaining a super complicated topic is definitely scripted, is definitely edited, you know, this is definitely not even the first time that this video has been recorded. uh, Still, I think there's some part of us that's just kind of reluctant and kind of feels bad because we feel like when we sit down to code, it's nothing like that 5 minute video. It's so much less fast paced, it's so much less confident and certain. There's a lot of trial and error. And that's what coding is like. That's always what it's like. Unless you're some sort of genius, Mozart kind of coder, it doesn't come easy. There's always that struggle. And so that's, I think hopefully what this video maybe showcases is that, you know, I'm sure that there's somebody just screaming at your monitor, oh my god, do it this way, do it that way. But this is really just me kind of working through the problem in my head, trying to find solutions, trying a few different things, seeing what works, what doesn't. Um, which is, that's basically that's programming. So anyway, I think I might leave it at this. I basically got done what I hoped to. I kind of got a better sense of the code, where things should be. I think I like this a lot. I like having this redimension board in the view because it's handling the view. I like that the controller now is much simpler. We are back to kind of the the view of the controller that we had before. The controller is the one that processes events and then decides what the view and the model need to do, what they need to see, right? Um, and so here we're saying to the view, hey, I want you to redimension the board with this board, the columns and the rows. And then here we've got this button handler that we've actually sort of exposed so that the view can use it to let the controller know, hey, uh, or not let the controller know, but just let the controller handle this action. Um, so that's definitely, I think, quite helpful. Okay, so I think that should be it. Let's just see if we can run this actually. It's probably the first thing you should do is just run it. And hopefully it runs. Yeah, okay. The funny thing about this is that I don't know what it is, and I don't know if once we get to the model we'll actually start seeing it function more predictably, but definitely when I was coding up the fxml file, if I made a mistake, like if I, accidentally sort of used some functionalities that I shouldn't be using, there was no error that was actually listed here. You can see there's an error here, or thinks there's an error, but I would write code and it didn't actually know that there was anything wrong with that code. But if I ran it, the application simply wouldn't launch. So it was a really unfortunate way to actually realize that the code you'd written was wrong because you didn't know why it was wrong or what was going on. I don't know if there's some facilities to be able to debug because literally I had to just shut down the application. Like, as far as the IDE was concerned, it was running. So I'm sure there's some error log somewhere, but I'll have to find it because definitely that is not how you want your tools to be kind of functioning. That they just kind of go off in a corner and die if they don't work. You want them to be kind of giving you feedback of here's why it went wrong. So let's just try again. On basic functionality, you can see that yes, it correctly redrew everything, and now you can see the handler is working as before. Okay, hopefully you enjoyed this video. I know this one was a little bit different. I don't know if in the future I'll make more of these videos. Definitely there's a lot of work to do, so I might turn this into a little series. Um, and I think it will get a lot more interesting once we actually start working on the colors and this kind of thing, and kind of really fleshing out this UI, making it definitely a lot nicer than it is right now. And then also getting to the model and building, the actual solver and all the kind of the meat of this. Because right now it is just basically a kind of a dummy UI. Alright, that's about it. Thank you for watching, and hope you enjoyed.